Blog Talk Radio.
Friends, will bring in tonight's episode of Alan Moore Month. If you couldn't tell by the intro song there, Jack the Ripper. And you'll be hearing a lot of him being mentioned tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jesse Starcher, and I want to welcome you all to the final entry to Alan Moore Month. This is by far the biggest undertaking that I have ever had in a comic, in a graphic novel, in an artist, or excuse me, in an author of themselves. We are going to be discussing From Hell, Alan Moore's From Hell. And if you've never heard of it, don't worry. I had not heard of it up until recently when I first grabbed the graphic novel. Believe it or not, I had no idea it had an affiliated adaptation starring Johnny Depp. And that's all right. That's okay. That's what we're here to do on the Radulich Broadcasting Network. We're here to learn, and tonight we hope to learn you one, as we say here in Ohio and West Virginia. We're going to learn you one. So let me go ahead and bring on our guests. First off, I'm going to talk about the guys that I know are actually here right now.
I'm here.
Hey, all right. Our co-host then. Let's go ahead and go to the co-host. Our co-host this evening, he is the patriarch. He is the one that makes it all happen for us here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network. His name is Mark Radulich. Sir, how do you do?
So did you like the punk rock mix I made you?
I haven't listened, sir. I have not listened, sir.
My wife is very jealous that I make few mixes and I'm not making her mixes anymore. That's partially because, I don't need to impress her anymore, but I still need to impress you because you're dreamy. But it's also because you're actually interested in music, and I can turn you on to things, and not quite the same. In any case, I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited to listen. By the way, folks, he's referencing last night's Metal Hammer of Doom, where we decided to cover an album, but by the second song, Mark Radulich was absolutely obsessed with making a Spotify punk playlist for me to listen to. So if you want to check that out, you can listen to last night's show.
You like punk rock music, and I wouldn't let that stand.
You would not.
I will not let that go.
That's right.
I feel like you're not listening to the right punk rock music, so I went to learn you one.
He went to learn me one. Mark Radulich, glad you're here. Glad you made it. I can't believe we've made it through 4 consecutive weeks talking Alan Moore, and I cannot wait. Please.
Let me just really, in all seriousness, say that I pulled this completely out of my ass. It was an idea that I had, as I said, inspired by the fact that someone had sent me some comics, and one of them was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And nobody had to join me in this endeavor. People could have said, No, we have better things to do than talk about old Grimsey, Alan Moore. But you guys really jumped at it, had a lot of enthusiasm, and made this project come to life as much as you can. And I am very appreciative. And I know you're gonna announce them in just a second, but I want to take the time to first thank you guys for helming this thing and reading all those comics. I want to thank Robert Winfree being on these shows. I want to thank Ronnie, and I want to thank Benjamin, and I want to thank your buddy. It was Josh who was on the first show, The Watchmen.
That was Cole, I believe. I think Cole joined us on Watchmen.
Okay. So for everybody who was a part of this and made it come to life, I appreciate you. I thank you. It's been fun. The material wasn't, but the conversations were a blast, and it inspires me to try to do something else in the near future, similar to this. I'll figure something out, but it's good to know that I have some guys I can trust that come on here and make these conversations fun and interesting. So thank you all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We got your back here, man. All right, well, yeah, let's go ahead and introduce our guests here. I cannot go forward in the realm of podcasts without my good buddy Ronnie Adams. Now, Ronnie Adams, how you doing tonight, man? Are you still got smiles here? We're in our 4th week of Alan Moore. What do you think, man?
Yeah.
Think about it now.
I tend to block things out that make me sad.
Well, before we get sent out tonight at the end of this very episode, I want to get everybody's thoughts on what they thought, or if they thought this affected them in any way, or if they came away with this with some type of a revelatory vision after reading Alan Moore for 4 straight weeks, or at least talking about Alan Moore for 4 straight weeks. So, Ronnie, thanks for joining us. Now let's go ahead and move next to he is the host of the 411 Ground and Pound. He is also the host of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy at some point here. I can't wait till it comes back. His name is Robert Winfree. And how you doing tonight, sir?
I'm pretty good. I surprised myself. I was able to finish the book before the show actually started today, and that was also I had to squeeze in another viewing of the movie, which I can't say I was overly thrilled about doing, but I did it. I finished the book. I'm ready to go. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here, both in both properties independently and as they relate to each other. So this ought to be a fun one.
All right, small correction.
Benjamin is in the switchboard area, so if you want to bring him on.
Absolutely. What were you going to say, Mark?
Before you do the small correction, Robert is also the co-host of our newly reminted podcast, Damn You Hollywood.
That's right. Damn You Hollywood. And I think we might be saying that this evening, as a matter of fact.
Once or twice.
All right. Benjamin J. Cologne. He joined us last week to talk one of his favorite Alan Moore books, and that was V for Vendetta. And then we drug him, along with Robert Winfree, right into From Hell. And not Drag Me to Hell, but we drug him into From Hell. And I want to go ahead and tell him thanks right up front. Benjamin J. Cologne, how you doing tonight, man?
Good evening. Doing good. I just mentioned earlier I beat Robert's time as far as like how soon before the podcast began that I finished the book and the movie, which I was both reading and watching at the same time up until about 10 minutes ago.
Wow. Well, you guys put in some work. I will tell you that right now.
I didn't. I was watching Full Frontal clips with Samantha Day on YouTube.
Full Frontal?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I won't delve into that anymore. We've got a big book to talk about. Alan Moore's From Hell. Now, when we get in, and when I first, like I said, picked up this book, I didn't realize how massive it was. We're talking close to on the order of 600 pages. So no one can fault anyone here if they did not read this material. I picked it up in July, I think, and I had to renew it on my library card twice. You get a book out a month for a month at a time. I had to renew it twice, and I probably owe like at least $2 in fines on it because I'm lazy. But regardless, I picked it up and I was like, man, this is going to take me a while to get through. So I started immediately. And for myself, I think it took me. I'm a leisurely reader. I can't really jump into something and stay focused, especially before the hour of 9 o'clock, which is my kid's bedtime. That's just not going to happen. So what I would usually do is I'd wait till the evening, crack it open, and go through about maybe 2 chapters. It's only 16 chapters, I think, which is a prologue, epilogue, and 14 in between. So I thought a chapter a night, I can have this knocked out in 2 weeks. Hey, look at me, I'm planning things. Again, like I said, it took me 2 months. So it was quite a task. But that's not to say that this book was overly unenjoyable. Alan Moore, the subject matter of this book, Alan Moore took a very focused look on a crime that occurred back in the later 19th century, in the late 1800s. This is Jack the Ripper. Okay, From Hell is, I would say, his theory on. Well, I wouldn't say his theory, but I mean his idea of the put together facts on what exactly happened. So let me go ahead and I'll quickly read my synopsis, provided I can find it here, as to what we're about to embark on, and then we'll get into discussion about the book and all that great stuff. All right. From Hell may look a little daunting at first. Within these pages lurks the proposed theory for the famed Jack the Ripper killings that took place in the late 1800s. In this piece, we are treated to the story about one royal physician, Sir William Gall, who has been tasked with the duty of eliminating some prostitutes who know a dirty secret about a certain prince and an illegitimate heir to the throne. Gall happily takes on this task, but not to just satisfy the queen, but to satisfy his own Masonic-fed psychosis as well. Believing the murder of these women will solidify man's reign over women for time to come, Gall attempts to ritualistic kill these women of the night, each time glimpsing his transcendence into godhood. The story is not just about the killings, though. From Hell also lets us peek into the life of Inspector Frederick Aberline, trying to track down and put together these clues as to who the Ripper is and what are his motivations. All right, so there's my brief summary. Any corrections there? Because trust me, I put that together at about 11:30 last night.
One small one. It's not his theory.
It's not a theory.
He got the theory. It's not his theory. He got the theory elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. And the theory that he's pulling from, he actually kind of just played around with and more so fictionalized. He added elements to it that were not part of the original theory to make it more dramatic.
Okay. Winfree?
For those of you who wish to keep track, the theory that he is basing his fiction off of is the book, primarily it's called Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, which proposes the Masonic royal cover-up to the whole Ripper, as the solution to the whole Ripper problem. Because, no one knows who Jack the Ripper really was, and people can still sell books off of it, as actually somewhat predicted by Moore in this book.
Yeah. So let's talk about, first off, we'll talk about the absolute girth of this particular piece, I want to ask Ronnie here first. I mean, dude, this is a graphic novel that is just unreal in size. Is this the largest graphic novel you've ever read, or is there anything else that you have had in your library or at any time in the past grabbed a hold of and read that even tops this?
Off the top of my head, no. I mean, I thought Watchmen and a few others were like the top, like the biggest books I've ever read. And I got a hold of this. I like Robert. I was mainly digital on reading this, and it was a task. It was really a task to get through this on an iPad. But it was, man, it's intimidating. I'm not gonna lie. It can be a rough read, but it's still a good read. But it's kind of rough at first.
Well, the good thing is there's pictures. That's about the only thing I could say. Because, man, if this was all nothing but words, as we've already discovered on here, I don't read books. Right, Mark Radulich?
He ain't one for no book learning.
Mark, what did you think here, man? I mean, did you actually get a chance to look at this thing at all? I mean, like, did you see the 500 and some pages that are in this thing?
I mean, I don't know if I understand your question. I own the book, and it's textbook size.
You do? I thought maybe you'd, like, hit the library or something. So this is something that you bought.
No, I'm good at wasting money.
Just ask my wife.
Exactly. But no, I once I got the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I went on Amazon and I bought these. When we decided what we were doing, I just went out and bought the three other books. I bought Watchmen, which I did not own. I bought From Hell, and I bought V for Vendetta. And I took a look at that, and I didn't know what I was getting into with From Hell. And in somewhat in retrospect, when I initially pitched this idea, it's just a quick side note. When I originally pitched this, I was thinking about at that time the Killing Joke hadn't come out yet, but now it has. And at the time, there was all these other ideas of doing something with Gavin's podcast, which seems to have gone the way of all flesh. But he was talking about doing something with the Killing Joke, so I was like, okay, well then we need another idea here for a movie, and I just did some preliminary research and said, oh look, From Hell is a graphic novel, and so I really knew nothing about it. Mm-hmm. What I'm getting at here, I knew zero about the story, knew zero about the book. I did a quick Wikipedia search for Alan Moore's stuff and went, well, I can't really narrow Swamp Thing down to anything that would be good for a podcast. And Gavin threatened violence on me if we did the Killing Joke. In retrospect, I wish we had, because I have a lot to say about that stupid movie that came out this past summer. Some of it was already covered by myself and Robert on Damn You Hollywood, our summer wrap-up series. You can go ahead and listen to that, and I'm sure I'll have more to say about it at the end of the year. But boy, we could have had a podcast tonight.
Robert Winfree, you are one of the most, let's say, I mean, when I think of you, man, I could just see like a sea of books surrounding you in your office. You got your pipe lit, and you got your microphone, and you're doing your podcast. Tell me, sir, I mean, did you feel like this book was a gigantic undertaking, or did you think that this was something that this is just fodder for some of the stuff you've read in the past?
Well, being LDS, I don't smoke, but I appreciate the visual. As far as an undertaking,
I didn't say the pipe was lit.
Had I had a physical copy, I might have considered it. Because this was digital, it was just like page, turn the page, turn the page, turn the page. There's no reference for how far I am into it, how farther I am from the beginning or close to the end. And also, no, this is not the largest book I've ever read. I don't think it's not the most dense. It is certainly up there, mind you, but it is not. I mean, look, as far as dense reading goes, I've never read anything denser than Heart of Darkness, which, despite being extraordinarily thin volume in terms of page count took me something like a month to read because you can't plow through that.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, I can read the totality of the Harry Potter series probably within 9 days.
I read Disney War in 24 hours. It's like a 600-page book.
Yeah,
wow.
There's light reading. This isn't light reading, but not the densest. But I'm very glad to have read it. I might wind up rereading it at some point in the future. There's a lot of interesting stuff here.
And we're definitely gonna go ahead.
I was going to say, this is the largest book I've read, but it's the largest graphic novel I've read.
Okay.
But,
all right, Benjamin J. Cologne, I want to ask you first. I know that you've had this for a while, correct?
Yeah, I've actually tried on 3 other separate occasions to finish it, and I hadn't.
That's amazing. Now you've actually had the opportunity and you've done it. Do you feel like you've accomplished something?
Yeah. Well, also not only in finishing it, but in finishing it before the show started.
Well, so folks out there, last 15 minutes, if you can't figure out what we're trying to say, this thing is huge. All right.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's big. Now, my next question. When we look at the art style of this particular book, let's go ahead and give our artist some props here. His name is, help me out, Eddie Campbell?
Yes.
Eddie Campbell. What do you think of this art style, Ben?
Well, you asked during Daredevil Man Without Fear if you'd ever seen more lines in a comic in your life. Well, asking you shall receive, sir.
That's the truth. Can you do your best to describe what this looks like so that our listeners have an idea that this isn't just some, again, this is not some flashy 90s comic book art in any way, shape, or form?
No, the art style, I can see where it might be off-putting to some people, I suppose. Eddie Campbell's art can get extremely impressionistic at points, to the point maybe of incoherence. I happen to think that's more a function of the storytelling than anything else, and more often than not, an extremely effective one. You'll notice Eddie Campbell's art tends to get murkiest and least solid and most impressionistic during moments of violence or impaired points of view or just general fits of anger or madness. But you'll also notice that, for example, during the scene during William Gull's, admittedly kind of plotting secret Masonic architectural history tour of London, all the historical landmarks are pretty solid, and Campbell is actually kind of revealed to be an outstanding draftsman. Alan Moore describes the geography of Whitechapel in great detail. I think because he wanted the location to be, in a way, its own character in the story. Mm-hmm. And a lesser artist would not be up to that task. What was that?
Echo. Go ahead and continue.
Lesser artists wouldn't be up to that. Character-wise, I'll say this. I don't know what it says about, the movie adaptation, but I found it easier to tell the characters apart through the art in the book than the acting in the movie. So,
oh, wow.
Alan Moore also tends, as we've seen in Watchmen and in V for Vendetta, to do a lot of storytelling without dialogue through the artists. And again, I speak from experience. That's harder than it looks. And again, Eddie Campbell does a really expert job at it.
Yeah, there were times in this book where I see exactly what you're talking about, where, Gull goes on one of his murderous sprees and things just take this crazy turn in the art style, and it looks all rough and, kind of scary. One of the reviews that I read was talking about how, it's just strictly black and white. I assume he's just using a pen. I mean, is he using anything else in this that you can think of there, Benjamin?
There's a lot of brushwork in here. There's
Okay.
a lot of
All right.
paintbrush work, but there's also like a lot of very thin, like like technical, thin point artwork type of stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. And they said that it was appropriate for the setting of the book, which was in England at that point in time. One of the things that they were thinking of was the amount of soot and how kind of dingy and dirty things were, especially for Whitechapel. So let me go ahead and bring in Ronnie here real quick. Ronnie, what do you think about Whitechapel, man? Is this a place you would want to go visit there back in that day?
No.
Please explain.
Well, just like you said, it's just, I look at it and I see Bourbon Street without the charm. And when I was, it's dingy, it's dirty, it's dark. So it's not something that the art in the book or how it's portrayed is not. It's not conducive to me going to visit anytime soon.
And it's very crime ridden. It's like
it's New Orleans with it's Bourbon Street without the charm.
Yeah, that's an apt description. The setting of Whitechapel, Robert Winfree, do you have anything you'd like to add about Whitechapel?
No, not really. It's 1888 London was a very divisive place between the haves and the have-nots, and Whitechapel was kind of a place of have-nots. It was a very transient population. It was a lot of people using aliases, like a lot of crime. It's Bourbon Street without the charm just to me means the city of Detroit, and that's kind of what this thing reminds me of in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Damn.
How about you, Mark? What do you think of Whitechapel, man?
I'm up for hookers roaming the street. I'm fine with it. Take me to Whitechapel, no problem.
Oh man.
Hookers, drunken debauchery, and guys with Cockney accents. Me and my wife would love it. For different reasons.
For different reasons. Well, we'll go ahead and I guess talk a little bit about the characters here. This is a story that's well rooted in history. Again, how many pages, Benjamin, in the back of that book are dedicated to Moore's research on trying to get everything correct here?
I'm not entirely sure what the page count, but it's easily like a sizable chunk of the book. Like if the book is 2 inches thick, the appendix is easily about half an inch of it. So
yeah, it's amazing, and it's cool that he did that because there were times in this particular book where I was. Some stuff just happened out of nowhere, and I had no idea what was going on.
Help me out.
Yes, yeah. There were times. There was specifically a time where Sir William Gall, who is the proposed Jack the Ripper here, where I can't remember which kill it is. It's like the second to last one, where he's chasing the girl down, and he looks in a window, and he sees somebody sitting there watching TV.
I love that part.
I was like, what the hell is going on here? It took me completely by surprise. And go ahead.
I love that part just because I love the look that they show on Gull's face when he looks through the window.
Yeah.
Second.
He has, both of them are looking at, I think the guy that's inside is also seeing. Supposedly, this is something that had happened where it was like a ghost sighting or something. At least that's what the reference I thought was saying.
Yeah, it's more describes it in the appendix as a story that he had heard where in more modern times that same location, people that were living there actually saw man chasing a woman down that same alley when there was apparently nobody actually there. So Moore kind of interprets that as sort of like, this transcendent moment in time where, like both of these time periods meet. There's actually a lot of that in this book, because that's kind of his whole thesis of what the story is about.
Very interesting stuff. He's committing these killings in order to pretty much become a god. One of the things I read was where Sir William Gall had a stroke, and they posited that at this point in time is where he met with one of the Freemason deities. Am I correct there? Is that what that is? Where he had, which I didn't know Freemasonry was a religion. Am I off on this? Somebody step in. Let me know.
Freemasonry isn't necessarily a religion in the traditional sense of the word.
Okay.
The incident in question is, in fact, the character refers to it as heat stroke. In actuality, it was a stroke that afflicted this gentleman. But in the book, he has delusions, or does he, where he sees one of the deities that are discussed within Masonry. Again, Masonry is not a religion as such. It's Masonry's weird. It's just weird. So getting a handle on it can be difficult, but he is just. It's more a foundation of learning, and the being that he theoretically meets is one that they discuss and talk about within Masonry much more so than in any other major religion.
Mm-hmm.
Can I throw this in here while we're talking about this particular thing? And I want to address this to Robert, just one Hannibal Lecter fan to another, and we can come back to this later on because it'll probably come up again later on. Did you notice more than a few, and I'm not even just talking the obvious ones where William Blake is actually a character in this book, but did you notice the obvious, some of the Red Dragon parallels that may have come up?
Yeah, there's a few. Again, you mentioned Blake being a character, the obsession with Blake's work, turning into this happens at the end. He actually believes he is the inspiration for a painting that Blake did. Again, no small reference there, as Francis Dolarhyde was attempting to physically transform himself into the Great Red Dragon from the painting of the same name, also done by Blake. But there's a few. Good.
And probably most unfortunately, which kind of sucks because there's actually a few pretty interesting Blake references in the book, but the baffling decision of the makers of the movie to turn Fred Aberline into lame ass Victorian Will Graham. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. I really do. And
well, put a pin in that one.
Put a pin in that
one.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms, and now I can't stop seeing it.
Yeah. We'll come back to that.
All right, very good. We'll definitely touch on that. So we got this great conspiracy that's going on to try and stop this. If there's a child out that could potentially have an heir to the throne from, which I believe was a prostitute at the time.
No, that actually is what causes the problems. It's not that she's a prostitute, because illegitimate children are just illegitimate. The character in this case, one of the princes of England, actually marries this girl in a Catholic ceremony, and England, of course, is very Church of England, their own religion. And he actually marries her and has a legitimate child that could have legitimate claim to the throne, and the Queen is just not having that.
No, she is the one that says, no, that's not going to happen. And in this book, one of the particular plot points that's kind of different from the movie is these ladies of the night find out, what exactly happened, and their plan is to kind of blackmail a certain person to try and get more money. Of course, when the Queen found out about that, she's like, no, All right, and she tasks Sir William Gull with trying to eliminate that whole problem, to which he takes it to lengths that are, I don't know, man. It's just a little over the top. But of course, a case could be made that this guy was definitely not right in his head. So let's go ahead and talk real quick about any characters that you want to. Robert Winfree, I mean, do you want to take the main character or our certain centerpiece here, which I think is Sir William Gull? Do you have anything you'd like to say about anything that struck you in the book? What would you like to say about him?
Well, Gull's fanaticism and his lunacy are very entertaining and interesting to me as a reader. Listening to him expound on his personal theories, viewing whole sequences from his legitimate first-person perspective, the discussion about time as the fourth dimension and potentially being able to move through it, which is addressed in a much more coherent and accessible fashion in Christopher Nolan's movie Interstellar. But it's still a theory, or a belief, not a belief system, but again, a theory that I find very interesting because, again, time is in fact a dimension. We simply can't traverse it other than in a linear fashion. And his insanity is very simultaneously interesting and frightening. His relationship with his coachman, Netley, produces quite a few enjoyable moments that caused me to chuckle. And it's a suitable interpretation of Jack the Ripper based on the evidence that they chose to go with for this book.
Netley seems more like the person that I almost identify with, although he's not really doing a whole lot of horrible things other than just carting this murderer around because he's been told to. But he is absolutely, even though he's not very smart, he is almost the one person that, if I was riding alongside this guy and he was describing all this stuff, I would also be overcome with exactly what he's talking about and potentially fall down to the ground and be like, okay, I'm done. There's a point in this book where Netley just can't handle it. And I think he gets off when after doing the tour of London, and he's pointing out all these great architects, and he starts to realize all these great structures that were built by these architects and what the actual purpose of it was for, which was apparently he's kind of letting him in on this whole subjugation of women and how women at one time had power, and now all these things have been built around London to make sure that that's not the case, that doesn't happen anymore. All of a sudden, he's just, Netley's overcome with the fact that the realization of what he's been traveling around this whole time and not even realizing what was going on, to where it almost, I think it makes him physically ill. Ronnie,
it doesn't help that he's, dumber than a bag of rocks and is quite susceptible to the suggestions that Gull is giving him.
That's true. Ronnie, do you have any insight on any character insight? You got a favorite character or anything you'd like to discuss about the characters in this book?
The most interesting character to me you've already touched on, and that was the coachman, who was kind of his evil Alfred. To a point, but that was the one that stood out to me the most, mainly because he is sort of an idiot, and he's very susceptible, like you said, to everything he was telling, and at no point in time did he ever think, I could just tell this guy no, or run for my life, or whatever. So,
Yeah, I didn't mention a lot of these characters that are in here. I could probably run down them. We've already talked about Sir William Gull, potentially Jack the Ripper, Netley, the coachman. We have Inspector Frederick Aberline, and then we have Mary Kelly, who is the last prostitute standing, I guess is what we would say. Although,
man. Isn't that a show on Fox?
Benjamin, you got any character insight here? Any favorite moments of these characters in the book?
We spend most of our time in the book anyway, dealing with things from William Gull's point of view, and Alan Moore tries to keep it entertaining. And if you're going to keep it entertaining, you might as well, tell the story primarily from the point of view of this person who is clearly losing his mind, doesn't know it, and is doing these horrible things, and having these visions that make sense to nobody except himself. Netley as his accomplice, I wouldn't call him a complete idiot. He's we find out later on he can at least kind of sort of read and write, which I can't imagine was 100% common among people around that part of London at the time.
Yeah.
And Alan Moore's theory is that in a sea of fake Jack the Ripper letters, the From Hell letter was the only one that maybe he didn't. He kind of says in the appendix it may have been the only authentic one, and he kind of he puts forth the theory that he had Netley write it as dictated by William Gull. Netley, he's not a complete idiot, but he's Gull's hired goon. He's got he kind of just does what he's told. He thinks that he's got a future in the Masons, waiting for him if he kind of just keeps his mouth shut and does what he's told, as distasteful as that may be. But he's kind of doing that just because he figures, it'll be a better life, and he can advance himself. The Ripper's victims, honestly, Moore definitely does a damn sight better job, fleshing them out as characters in the book than in the movie.
Yes.
I think they got picked off like flies in the movie without, even much of a chance to, figure out which one was which.
Look, the average flock of teenagers that gets mowed down by Jason have more personality than was given to the women in the movie.
That's true.
Indeed. And we get to know him. We get to know him just enough, and this is, I'll probably be going back to this a lot. From Hell is first and foremost very much a horror story, and the key with, as far as I'm concerned with horror, and I guess I subscribe to like Stephen King's philosophy of this is, you have to make. If you establish characters and if you have, you give your audience a reason to care about them, then it becomes that much more horrific when they're in danger. Alan Moore did a great job of that. He set up the stakes of, why they were being pursued by the Ripper, and why, it was kind of hopeless for them. They really had nowhere to turn, and that's what made it, easy for an educated guy with a lot of resources like William Gull to just kind of pick them off one by one in increasingly more brutal ways, which I'm sure we'll also get into shortly.
Well, man, it gets rough, and it continues to escalate. And I don't know if that's because, in his mind, he's got to do something more to try and just, I don't want to call it a high, but it's almost something similar where he's got to take it another step farther, and the murders have got to get just that more grisly, so he could glimpse or again try to transcend into godhood.
Well, the technical term from a behavioral standpoint is devolving. He just, like you said, he's chasing a feeling, trying to find something that you kind of get the first time, and it's just never as good. So you attempt to compensate with more elaborate staging, more brutal murders, higher number of murders, having them closer together. It's a very common thing with most serial killers. not all, but most, they do devolve in that sense, and just things get more and more frantic. And that's usually when they start getting caught, is when they become sloppier and just more and more wild.
Mm-hmm. Mark Radulich, now you, sir, I mean, you're around some shady people every day. I know that's a fact. Why don't you?
I can tell you some stories.
I know you can. Can you give us an idea, though, as to why the public is continually fascinated by the Ripper killings? Do you have any idea? Or can you give us an idea or a theory here?
Well, I mean, it's not just the Ripper killings. I mean, walk into your average Books A Million or Barnes and Nobles. The Borders is now gone, but walk into your mall bookstore, and there's an entire area dedicated to true crime, and in that true crime section, there's at least a shelf, if not more, dedicated to just serial killers. Look at how many TV shows we have that are, I mean, and not just TV shows, for men. I mean, the Oxygen is a channel for women, and that show's full of fucking shows, Snapped, and all these shows where women go nuts and start murdering people. We're not just fascinated. We're not just fascinated with serial killers. We're fascinated with murder. A highly rated show that just ended drug back up the John Benet Ramsey murder. Mm-hmm. So I think we're a voyeuristic public. We're an extremely isolationist, xenophobic country. We have pockets of progressivism. We have pockets of inclusion. But for the most part, the spine of this country is get the fuck away from me and get off my lawn. As a way of defining ourselves. Mm-hmm. The Atlantic Ocean couldn't be any, the Atlantic Ocean, just couldn't be any bigger. It put more oceans between us and the rest of the world. But by the same token, because we're so isolationist and xenophobic, we like to look safely at these other facets of life that we don't want anywhere near us, but are pretty cool to look at. And one of those things is the dangerous murderer. We just, as a culture, really, really enjoy our violence, and that's one aspect of it. Anyone else? I mean, I'm willing to debate that if someone sees it any other way, because I threw a lot out there, and maybe you don't see it as I do, but that has sort of been my interpretation of the United States.
I don't think you're wrong there. The one thing I would add as to why we're obsessed with the Ripper killings is because he got away with it, fundamentally.
Yep.
I mean, the ones that we tend to latch onto from a societal standpoint are the ones that go unsolved. I mean, there was a lot of time and energy and thought and material devoted to the BTK killer until he was caught. The same way that now, Jack the Ripper's one everyone knows. The other kind of big serial killer that people remember is in that same vein as the Zodiac Killer, who, again, fundamentally speaking, got away with it. We don't know who the Zodiac was.
So that goes right back to the Johnny Ramsey thing. Why is this so popular? Why does anyone care about this particular kid who got murdered? Because we don't know who really murdered this kid. Well, PBS seems to think they know who it is now. But at the time, we didn't know who really got this kid.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the others, people know the names of, Bundy and Gein, but, a near contemporary of Jack the Ripper was H.H. Holmes, who very few people know about, despite being the first, really kind of documented multiple murderer, as it was called. Now we refer to them as serial killers, in the United States, and to the point where, we still don't know an accurate count of how many people he killed. Depending on the material you choose to believe and read through, it could be as many as 200 to 300.
Wow.
I don't subscribe to that line of thought, mind you, but he was a relatively prolific killer.
Well, it kind of leads into my next question, because we're throwing names out here left and right of who these people are. Ronnie Adams, what interests you more? Okay, and I know this is rather morbid subject, but I mean, what interests you more? A good whodunit, or a good investigation into the actual person that did it, the reason behind it? What seems to gravitate your interest?
Oh, wow. A little bit of both, to be honest with you. Wow. The psychology behind why they did it is a little more interesting to me, because it gets into that person's mind and helps me realize who they are. I like a good mystery, but I guess I would have to go with I've read up on different subjects like this. You know, as morbid as it may sound, but I do like to find out who that person is and what happened to them, or if anything happened to them, if they just enjoyed that, you know, that crime, killing or whatever. I guess it was the person who did it for me, not the who done it.
Okay. The story behind why they did these atrocities. Yeah. Mark Radulich, I think this is your field of expertise, man. Why would we want to know why versus why can't we just say, okay, that person did it and we're done? What's the reason why we look at the why behind it?
Why someone would commit murder or multiple murders?
Do you have do you have any thoughts as to why is that something that we always have to delve into? Why can't we just move on?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if everyone has that sort of intellectual curiosity. I think that's more individualistic. I'm somebody who likes to dig, but I'm surrounded by people at work who I think have Dory's brain. You know, they just forget shit 5 minutes after it's happened. So we could have the same guy come into jail, 20 times in a row, and each time will be like it's the first time.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in why a person does the thing that he does. I've got that intellectual curiosity. I'm sure some of you guys do too. Well, others don't. Others are perfectly. We had a guy. I'll just briefly. We had a guy who was probably persistently mentally ill, though we don't have enough records to say that one way or the other. But he was in our psych ward for the last 60 days, 60 to 70 days, and he was released 2 days ago. He was released to the crisis stabilization unit, and they let him out in less than a day. He immediately went home and beat the shit out of his pregnant girlfriend and two of her roommates.
Jeez.
And when they ran to the neighbor's house, he beat the shit out of them there too, until he was finally arrested. Again, this happened yesterday. He was let out 2 days prior to that. And to a lot of the people that I worked with, no one bothered to ask what would possess him to do that. What drove him to this? It's not even a function of the journalism. There were 3 or 4 different articles that missed crucial points of that entire story, like why did he get out of the CSU so quickly? But there was nobody asked why he beat this girl. Nobody cared. The focus was just on what a violent asshole, and that's it. And people just moved on. So I think it's very situational, and I think it's very individualized. I don't know if I can give you the kind of general answer I did before.
No, that's a good answer, man. With From Hell, more obviously dives into why this whole atrocity occurred. Before, I'd say probably prior to me reading this book and coming to an understanding of what the movie represented also, I knew Jack the Ripper was a thing. I had no clue about the whole conspiracy thing. I had no clue about as to why these things were done. It never occurred to me to really get into it. Now, that is partly because I didn't have much of an interest, but I can tell you that, nowadays when something like this occurs, or, any tragedy that occurs, I'm asking, why did this happen? As anybody else who'd be touched by that tragedy was probably doing the same thing, and I think that, of course, leads to a lot of speculative things that occur after a tragedy happens. But one of the quotes here for Moore in regards to this book, he states that the greater part of any murder is the field of theory, fascination, and hysteria that is engendered. That it is engendered. A black. I'm going to try and say this. Alan Moore would sound so great doing this right now. A black diaspora of our tireless, sinister enthusiasm. Jack mirrors our hysterias. Faceless, he is the receptacle of each new social panic. And when we look into why these things are done, we start to look at everybody else around us. At least that's what I mean, I don't know. I could be living next door to a murderer right now. And trust me, I'm watching, even in the back of my mind, or just going outside and enjoying a drink at the picnic table in our front yard, I see the next door neighbors. I see anything fishy, all of a sudden I'm cataloging that. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And it's because of stuff like this that has occurred in our history and in our times today that we've become absolutely, at least I've become critical of just about every. I don't know if that's just because I've grown up or what, but I watch everybody with a weary eye because of all this crazy stuff that's going on. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll move on here. Next question. Let me see. I'm going to get back to my questions here. All right. Actually, let me just go ahead and move to Benjamin. Benjamin, you've got some things I know to say about this particular novel. Please have at it, sir.
Not sure what I'm looking at notes that I wrote earlier. I'm trying to see where I can jump in here. As far as the differences between the why and the what and the details and the mystery versus just finding out, just knowing up front. It kind of does an interesting thing here where and this is why I keep coming back to the fact that From Hell as it exists in graphic novel form is absolutely a horror story, because Moore is not concerned with the mystery of who Jack the Ripper is. Moore tells you up front who Jack the Ripper is. That's not the point of the story that he's telling. For him to assert, in such detail something that was never actually discovered, and then basically putting the audience into the scene of the murders as they happen, is kind of inherently terrifying. You contrast that with the movie, which kind of presents itself more as a procedural whodunit and puts you in Aberline's point of view, which opinions may differ, but I think Aberline, he was factually the detective on the Ripper case, but for the purposes of telling an entertaining story, he's not a particularly interesting character, and they try to do certain things in the movie to make him more interesting, and it doesn't work. So it's trying, the movie's trying to be more of a procedural, crime story, which makes it a little less satisfying because there's less of a horrific element and more of a detective element. The problem with that is, like I said, the killer is never discovered, let alone brought to justice. So that kind of falls, it's kind of empty, where, you're setting up a detective story that has no ending. As far as, as painstakingly researched as From Hell was, definitely presents a hell of a case as far as, Moore's theory of, that William Gull was responsible for the murders. I know that supposedly that's also been debunked along with, dozens of other Jack the Ripper theories for a couple of reasons. There's evidence to support it, and I'm sure there's evidence to support a lot of other wacky conspiracy theories about who the Ripper was. As they say, the truth of what really happened and who was really responsible is probably pretty boring anyway. More just first and foremost, I think he had a couple of ideas that he wanted, that he saw that he could kind of tie together into this whole greater story that's kind of in the culture. A hack writer would just kind of leave it at that. Leave it with, the case that he presented and the embellishment that he kind of did for the purposes of entertainment. Alan Moore kind of, weaved this whole story around like actual facts mined from all these dozens of books on the subject. And it's basically it's pretty much the best example of a true crime novel that you're probably ever going to find in comic book or in graphic novel form.
I could agree with that. Absolutely. Robert Winfree, let me bring you back in here. From Hell is said to touch on many themes, including the role of women in Victorian society, the collective neurosis of a culture which produced a killer like the Ripper in the first place, the influence of the Ripper on the 20th century, from the rise of the serial killer to sensationalism in the media, to shifts in attitudes about sexuality and the sexes, and the view of the present day from the dawning of the modern era. Which one of those themes do you believe stood out to you the most from this particular story?
To me, the two that stand out the most are the sensationalism of the media, to the point where I believe there's a minor sub-story where one of the major London publications actually fabricates the first letter from Jack the Ripper and names him such, all in the name of... I mean, really, and considering that this book in and of itself was printed in 1989, it's really the precursor of, for want of a better phrase, TMZ-style journalism.
Yeah. That's true, man. It really is.
And this, again, the sensationalism, the responsibility or irresponsibility of the media as it pertains to this, and getting people to kind of frenzy and obsess over it. The other thing that comes through is, again, partially deliberately, like within the actual text as opposed to subtext, is the dawning of the 20th century, the move into the fully realized industrial era, and in that sense, and Morris talked about this himself, that Jack, in that sense, is it's predominantly literary, that he's able to work that message in. Really, Jack was kind of a fortunate member of, he benefited from fortunate timing. Newspaper publications at that point in time were just starting to circulate further and further. Literacy rates were on the rise. The world was just kind of getting smaller at that point rather than bigger. And to cap it all off, you have violent murders. And, again, like Mark mentioned, we're somewhat of a voyeuristic society, so what better to kind of capture people's attention and sell material than violent death? It's a good seller.
Can I piggyback on this? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll wait till you're done. But I do want to piggyback on something that you're saying.
The last thing, that was the other thing I wanted to mention, was something like that. I mean, look, serial killers are not new. We have this slight misconception based around inaccurate information that, Jack's one of the first documented ones. Again, I mentioned H.H. Holmes a little bit ago. One of the first documented in the 1900s, if not the first. I have to double check some of my facts on that. But the reality is serial killers did not spring into existence in 1890 or 1880. The internal combination of biology, sociology, and societal influences that go into making serial killers have always existed. We just finally were in a in a place where we could tell everyone about them. There was a dense enough population that they would be that would help. That in some ways helps foster that. If nothing else, you're just going to increase your chances of running into one numerically when there's as many people crowded together as there are in a major city like London, New York, Los Angeles, etc. And he just, again, it was inevitable, and it just kind of happened to, even around that time, it was somewhat inevitable, and that's just kind of where Jack falls. The fact that Moore is able to spin that into a somewhat interesting narrative about, moving forward as a society at that point is a credit to him as a writer. Anyway, Mark, you had something you wanted to piggyback on?
Just that I think where I run counter to you guys, or especially your last statement, as far as what interests you the most, is the fact that sensationalism in media and media sort of dusting up people's emotions and pointing them in a certain direction is not new. It didn't come about in the 1800s. It's older than that. You go back and you read some of these history books about U.S. elections starting with Washington, certainly thereafter. There were magazines and pamphlets and newspapers of the day that were just as bad. And I think this is why I sort of lose interest in this topic, because more sort of focuses on look where we've come. But I think had there been 24-hour cable news in 1790, you'd have seen the same shit. I think there are certain patterns in human behavior and patterns in history that sort of keep bringing us to the same places. So the idea that, look, sensational headlines, lowbrow stuff to attract people and ultimately to sell papers, you're always going to come rounding back to the same place. You're gonna find the low-hanging fruit to put out there for people to gobble up, so that you can make money. And I don't, and the fact that Moore focuses on it, I'm like, okay, and so rain is wet too, and what else you got? I think, and I'm not putting down Robert. If that's what you found interesting, then that's what you found interesting. I just don't. I think the element of women in that society, now that's something that has changed. That's dynamic. Women are in a far different place now than they were 100 years ago, and so to sort of study that and how it evolves and develops, I think is a more interesting thing. And it's one of the few things about what I'm going to focus on the movie here. It was one of the few things about what little of that was represented in the movie. I was able to pluck out and go, well, at least that's interesting. But the media stuff I have no use for. That, to me, like I said, rain is wet, big deal.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin, did you have a favorite theme that came through in this particular book?
Yeah, like Robert, the Ripper is kind of like this harbinger of the 20th century. It was interesting to me, and it certainly was interesting to Alan Moore because he keeps coming back to it. It's pretty much the central theme of the entire story. He pretty much dedicates an entire early chapter of the book to the idea of it, and then goes to great lengths to connect a lot of dots. As a factual account, those dots may seem like a bit of a stretch. As a form of narrative foreshadowing, especially in terms of a horror story, it can be used to pretty terrifying effect, and I think it was. I was pretty impressed with how relevant a lot of the themes of the book still are. Moore's satirizing of the 20th century and beyond, he obviously had the benefit of him as a writer being a lot closer to the 20th century than the citizens terrorized by the Ripper were.
Mm-hmm.
But satire works for a reason. It's usually because there's something there that begs to be criticized in some way. There's still a lot of things from that time in or out of the context of the murders that we're still struggling with today, even though the 20th century is 16 years gone and counting. whether that means from hell is prophetic or just that these, like Mark was saying, these are things that are kind of inherent to human beings that existed long before, that period in time and will continue to exist long after. I guess, it's up to your interpretation. It's not easy to draw a point A and a point B between two time periods over a century apart, then draw a line between them and say at the same time, this is how far we've come, and also this is how far we haven't come.
It's true. So that's a tremendous way of looking at it there. Ronnie Adams, I about asked you if you got a fart joke for us, because I think you said that you were good for that. Now, what?
The commentary and the ideas that these gentlemen, I mean, they're so intelligent, and about all I'm good for right now is fart jokes and laughing. But
I'd kill for a good fart joke right about now. Wish I had one. Wish I had one to make, man.
Well, okay. Ronnie, what did you read this? I know you read this a while back. I mean, what did you take from it? When you first read this, what did you take from hell?
A nosebleed and a headache. No. There's so many things that Moore touches on. One of them is the role of women in this society versus and the parallel, and honestly the parallel between how far we've come and how far we haven't come was also something that came up in my mind. The psychology behind why he's doing what he's doing and who this character is. But what was thinking about it and doing a little bit of research on it, I don't know. It's one of those heavy books that it just brings up so many questions at the time, and so many questions when you think about it. It's almost too much for me to comprehend it at times. But the most interesting now is when you were talking about it and you were discussing things for the show, was who cared about these women? Nobody really. I mean, the cops didn't, the people didn't, but they were being murdered in the streets, and it really showed not only the role of women in this society, but the role of women in this particular class of women. When I mean, I guess you could say that in the almost caste system that they have in this time period, they were poor. They were women of the night, and nobody really cared about them as human beings or with families or with any kind of thoughts, dreams, hopes, or whatever. They were just prostitutes. They were just women that are being slaughtered on the streets, and it took somebody to actually figure out that these are people, and we have to figure out what's going on. So it's kind of sad in that respect of, did anybody really care about these people enough to really buckle down and find out who this guy was?
Yeah.
I totally want to figure out that those prostitutes are people too.
Well, I mean, you kind of wonder. It makes me wonder, like,
Hashtag
if it wasn't
More Lives Matter.
Oh no!
Jeez. Robert Winfree with the zinger. Nice.
That's no fart joke, sir, but it'll do.
It kind of makes you wonder if it wasn't for the media and its sensationalism of this particular horrific crime, these crimes that were going on, would it have been something that people paid attention to? Of course, people were frightened to go out, but I mean, if you didn't have the paper sitting there telling you, hey, there's a murderer out there on the streets, you do not want to go out there. I'm sure word of mouth travels fast, but when the media gets a hold of something and turns it up to volume 11, hysteria takes over. And then the pressure of trying to name a suspect, that was one of the things that came through here, is like, hey, we got to give this guy a name. and we got to find this person. We got to find out who it is. You never know. They could have easily swept this under the rug if it wasn't for the fact that there was such pressure to figure out who exactly was behind all this. And I say pressure. That probably wasn't all of it. I'm sure some people had the sense of duty and good to bring a person like this to justice, such as our good inspector tried to do. But anyway, so I want to go ahead.
I know you guys are not into politics, and when you say a line like, "Oh, something starts out as simple, then the media gets a hold of it, and then people get into a sudden panic," I'm sitting here now, like almost having a seizure with how many examples of that are going on right now.
Right
but
now.
That's not the podcast. I'm to myself. I'm just like, nah.
The truth.
Well, I mean,
I see it.
We'll go to something completely opposite of politics. The people dressed as clowns. Has anybody really? And if you don't know it, there are news stories and people are sharing on Facebook about random people dressing up as clowns and creeping around people's houses and in bushes. Has anybody really seen these people dressing as clowns? No, but you hear about it on the news. You hear about it on Facebook. You hear about it on all these social media outlets and all these media outlets. That you're afraid. I mean, like I've said myself, half joking, with all these people running around in clown costumes, it's no wonder that my family wonders why I want to get concealed carry, because I'm terrified of clowns.
Uh-oh.
And but that's something that's completely controllable, and it's a ridiculous fear. But because it's been so overblown, I'm like looking out my back door saying, there don't be a freaking clown out there. Kind of deal. I mean, but has anybody, really seen him? Has anybody been arrested for said, crime or whatever?
Crime.
I don't know.
I can bring that back home. I can bring that back to the subject if anybody's heard of this before. This was probably a year or so ago, but apparently there was one of those clown stories in Alan Moore's hometown of Northampton in England, and a lot of people swore up and down that it was him.
Oh, you're kidding.
I was unconvinced because it was not a clown with a gigantic beard, so
I was going to say, man,
but
Alan Moore dressed up as a clown.
Everybody just has this, everybody just has this mythic, outlook or opinion of Alan Moore, that he's just this gigantic damn weirdo that will do anything. That you pick the weirdest thing, the weirdest story you can find, and that's probably him. And if you've ever actually heard him talk before, he's actually fairly down to earth. But I guess that makes for boring, article writing.
Oh yeah, we can't have any fun at his expense. I mean, for crying out loud. I listened to some of the interviews that he actually conducted with, I think it was a radio station. It was a while back. He was showing some Swamp Thing stuff when he was doing Swamp Thing. So that's how old that was. And the guy was honest to goodness. He seems like an actual person. Even though he's looked deep into my soul from the set of my, from my computer screen, he's looked into my soul like 20 times because of those pictures I keep coming across. He's he seems like a decent dude.
The myth of him has kind of gotten bigger than the actual guy.
What he actually is. Yeah, that's a fair assessment. All right, we'll go. Mark Radulich, are you ready to take us to the movie, sir?
No.
Blame you.
Damn you, Hollywood.
Oh, God. Damn you, a lot of people.
But I suppose I should, since that's the whole point of this podcast, was to compare the book to the movie. I'm much more enjoying your guys' conversation about the book and contributing where I can.
Too bad.
Too bad. All right. Well, so From Hell, the movie, features an absent-swilling dandy named Johnny Depp, and Ian Holm, who you may remember as old Frodo from
Bilbo.
Bilbo from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't remember who the girl is. Who cares? In any case,
Heather Graham.
Heather Graham and her terrifying eyes.
You're a
Thank
wolf,
you.
Jesse.
all right, so I'm not even going to look at Wikipedia on this. It's just here's the plot, basically. Murders be happening, prostitutes be dropping, a gang of people drag the prince out of his home, and drag his pretty wife out of the home as well. The wife ends up being lobotomized and put in an insane asylum. I don't think we ever see the prince again. Meanwhile, back in old Whitechapel, they drag Johnny Depp out of an opium bar and say, "Clean up, dude. We need you to solve this murder." See. Eventually, he figures out that it's Ian Holm who plays. What's the guy's name again? Gull.
Yeah, Sir William Gull.
He figures out it's Sir William Gull, who is a Mason, and he's part of it is he's doing it on behalf of the Queen. Part of it is he's doing it because there can be only one, and he wants everyone's Highlander power. That was what I got out of the movie.
Wow.
Ironically enough, this would not be the worst Highlander movie.
Not even
There's a horse and buggy chase.
Man, that guy gets messed up on that one horse and buggy.
It really
Jeez.
does. Eventually, he gets the law on his side. Gull ends up being put in an asylum too and being lobotomized after he is tried by the Masons, and he tells the Masons, "I'm better than you," and they say, "Well, that's fine. We're going to lobotomize you anyway." Meanwhile, Heather Graham has taken off with the baby of the prince, she is living in a cottage, and Johnny Depp dies in an opium bar. That's the movie, folks. So one of the major differences between the book and the movie is the book goes out of its way, as you guys said before, to not be a whodunit. It's upfront who Jack the Ripper is, and so that allows you to sort of focus on these other things. Whereas this movie is you follow an absinthe-swilling dandy around England as he tries to figure out who done it. And it's and then when he finally confronts them, and he's hit over the head, and then we have a chase, and he's fallen in love with Heather Graham, and oh God, damn you, Hollywood! This is yet another movie full of stupid cliches. I mean, I can't even say it rests on the what's good about it is that it rests on the performances of the actors. Everyone reading their lines in this thing for the most part, like they're at gunpoint. It's dreary, and as far as whodunits go, it's like if you pay any close attention to what's happening, or if you've read the damn book, you know exactly who done it, and there's no tension. So, Robert, I don't have a whole lot to add. We really I wish I said, from hell, sure, that leads right into Halloween, right into scary stuff. That'll be great. And I had no idea what exactly I was getting into. Or we should have done this one first, so as not to end with such a shitty story. But you want to talk about the movie? What were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, when the best performance from your movie isn't actually Ian Holm chewing scenery, but from the man who would become Hagrid quoting Shakespeare, you have failed miserably on at least two fundamental levels. This, I mentioned this on Facebook, just kind of my own thought to myself that I subsequently posted on the internet because that's what everyone does. This movie has a fundamental lack of understanding about the source material. Now, source material is not this, carved in stone, finger of God, sacrosanct thing. You can monkey with it. You can change things, you can change perspectives, and that's all fine and dandy, as long as you understand the material that you are changing so that you don't do a complete 180 from what it's supposed to be. In fact, I mean, the best adaptations do make an appropriate amount of changes because the mediums are different. There have to be changes. I mean, Jurassic Park, for example. The book and the movie are two very different experiences. They're both very, very good. But one is, like the other in base theme and name only. And no one cares because, again, they're both great. Because the adaptation of Jurassic Park understood the material that it was translating into the new medium and made the appropriate adjustments. Here, the fact that they take what's supposed to be a borderline metaphysical character study and turn it into a really crappy whodunit is a bad decision. Hiring Johnny Depp is usually a bad decision. In this instance... In this instance, hiring him and then having him play, Moore describes him as an absinthe-swilling dandy. I think Ben was right on the money when he's an even weaker version of Will Graham. We're going to throw out the phony psychic angle, and we're going to give Johnny Depp real magic powers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awful.
And you took everything about the book that made it interesting, that made it, relevant, for want of a better phrase. You threw it out the window, and you made a really crappy pseudo-mystery that no one looks like they wanted to be there for.
I guess here's my question. I will give it to Jesse or Ronnie or Ben, whoever has an idea as to what the answer to this might be. Of all the things that could have been, that Hollywood could have paid money for to adapt to the silver screen, what possessed them to think this was a good idea? And more to the point, well, we know the answer to my next question. My next question, and Robert really said it, is half the time they want to adapt something, you have studio executives who don't really understand the material. And while you might have directors and screenwriters who do understand the material, they are usually monkeyed with to a large degree, and told, and given notes saying, no, take this out, put this in, give Johnny Depp an opium addiction for some odd reason, do this, do that, and give it a happy ending. I'm actually surprised.
And you're not dealing with a couple of talented directors here. The Hughes brothers do not exactly have a deep, varied, and respected filmography behind them.
I liked a few of the Hughes brothers movies.
By all means, go ahead and enjoy them. I'm just saying, when arguably the best film on your resume is The Book of Eli, there's a problem.
To go back to my initial question, just rounding back to this. Like I said, this thing was chock full of Hollywood notes and cliches, and I know why they do that. So I'm just gonna I'm not even gonna bother having a discussion about it. We'll be here. You can listen to Damn You Hollywood for me and Robert Winfree to discuss that sort of thing. But as much, I don't understand how a Hollywood executive came to the conclusion that this book, as Moore wrote it, in any adaptive form, would have brought people to the movies.
It's Jack the Ripper, man. It's got to be Jack the Ripper. Now, I have not done any bit of research as to why in the world they chose to adapt this at that time, but that's the only thing I could think of. Is that, well, we got to find a good Jack the Ripper story. Okay, well, who's wrote a good Jack the Ripper story? I heard Alan Moore did.
See, here's the thing about that. Like, I can see adapting, a Jack the Ripper story. I can't, for the life of me, I'm with Mark, I can't for the life of me understand why somebody would try to adapt this Jack the Ripper story. This book is really messed up. Like, this book describes, this book goes into very graphic detail that you would never be able to get away with in your standard R-rated Hollywood movie, about all of these brutal, like increasingly more brutal killings. And that's kind of, that's not to say that they're gratuitous in the book. At least I don't think so. I think they serve the purpose of, like advancing the story in the way that it does, because once again, it's a horror story, and you are meant to be horrified by the events that are taking place and the increasing brutality of it. But there's some things that you can't do in an R-rated, in your standard R-rated Hollywood movie. And if you have to take out those elements from this book, they are very important elements in the story. You take those out, and you're left with, what we got, which was something very empty and very superficial that kind of glossed over a lot of those things to make way for Johnny Depp's wacky visions.
Yeah, I don't understand why this one. I mean, really, there is a lot of material out there in regards to the killings that happened, in theories behind it, who did what, who did this. Yeah, I couldn't even posit as to why they would choose this. I mean, Alan Moore, what were we talking here? This came out in 2001?
Yeah,
the movie, yes.
Okay, the movie came out in 2001. Is this isn't his first adaptation, is it? Did they adapt any other Alan Moore stuff prior to this? I can't think of any prior to it. I'll go to the internet. You guys can go ahead and talk. I'll find out.
Probably not.
Go ahead, Ben. I'm sorry.
No, I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't think so. And also, this movie is also a very, very good argument in Alan Moore's favor as to why he doesn't want his name on any adaptations of his work.
Yeah.
And will actively not consent to any adaptation of any work that he actually owns himself anymore. Because this one, this adaptation built the coffin, and then League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I know I didn't get a chance to be on that podcast. But if you're wondering my thoughts as to that movie, that drove all the nails in. and that's exactly at the point when Alan Moore decided, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore.
So here's a bit of trivia to kick around. So you figure Hollywood plans things out much like a TV executive. They have an idea of what movies are coming out when. They also know more or less what other studios are doing what. They they have an idea of what they think they can sell in what month, and they try to position things so that whatever they've invested their money in will win the weekend. So here's what From Hell had to compete with in the weekend that it came out in 2001. The Last Castle, with Robert Redford, James Gandolfini, Mark Ruffalo, Steve Burton, and Delroy Lindo from DreamWorks, and Riding in Cars with Boys. Riding in Cars with Boys, directed by Laverne and Shirley fame Penny Marshall, and starring Drew Barrymore, Steve Zahn, Brittany Murphy, the late Brittany Murphy, James Woods, Lorraine Bracco, Sarah Gilbert, and Vincent Pastore. Now,
it was
the week
a really
before that,
crappy week for movies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, hang on. The week before that was Bandits, Corky Romano, and Iron Monkey.
Corky Romano. Jeez.
Okay, this is just a bad month for movies. Whatever month this was in 2001 was not a good time to be a film fan. I got a bit of a soft spot for Bandits, by the way, but still.
I'm pretty sure the month of October 2001 was taken over completely by Training Day, which came out October 5th.
Yeah. Had to.
Just to finish this up, the following week, October 29th, right in time for Halloween, we had K-Pax with Kevin Spacey.
Spooky.
Kevin Spacey and Jeff Bridges.
On the line with Lance Bass, Joey Fatone, Emmanuel.
We're just gonna stop you right there.
Lance Bass was he in sync?
It was the whole movie, wasn't it?
That was Team Ghost, starring Tony Shalhoub and Matthew Lillard. So
13 Ghosts is actually pretty good.
I didn't mind that one.
I forgot Tony Shalhoub was in that.
Didn't see it.
not a bad movie.
I mean, it's not quite as good as the original, but it's also a very different story from the original.
But none of that matters because November 2nd, Monsters, Inc. came out and decimated everything.
Oh, yeah. Probably won the year, or at least a quarter.
And it deserved to.
No, what won the year was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, followed by The Fellowship of the Ring. But Monsters, Inc. came in third.
Yeah, that's a pretty stiff competition.
So anyway. We have, how much time do we have left here? We've got about 24 minutes left in plugs and thank yous, and I'm just going to go around. Ronnie, what burning desires do you have about this movie? Because, I mean, I honestly, there's not a whole lot of film here to interpret. It's shit.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a hollow representation of a very dense and interesting book. It's exactly the kind of Hollywood tripe that Robert Winfree and Robert bangs his head on the desk and I tend to celebrate. But I know shit when I see it, even if I celebrate it. So give me your.
That's the summation of our podcast right there, guys. Because you've never heard our movie reviews.
I'm in complete agreement. Okay, the story behind this movie for me was I was a youth leader in my church at the time back in West Virginia, and one of the youth wanted to go see this movie, and not really having never read the book before, and not really knowing what it was about. I took a couple of them, I went with them, a couple of them to the theater, and we instantly walked out after the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever. So that was my first exposure to this movie. When I finally watched it, and after reading the graphic novel, I was like, who in their mind thought this was a good parallel to the book? Who in their right mind? And you could smell Hollywood all over it, because they're like, the magic powers of Johnny Depp and taking out some of the key elements of the book or just rewriting it completely. So this was not good. I completely agree. This was not good as a movie, and generally, typically, I'm kind of a Johnny Depp fan. I know that I'll get some groans on that one, but this was just this was terrible, and it almost made me see why, like you all said, like it was said, that Alan Moore was like, I don't want my name anywhere near Hollywood when they do stuff, and with my work. So it was kind of a boring movie too.
It was indeed the first adaptation, by the way, according to Wikipedia here. So this was his first adaptation to the big screen. Ouch.
Not a good start.
No,
it would only get worse.
You only get one chance to make a first impression.
Yeah.
Boy, did they ever make it.
I've been
Roughly
sitting here
crater
with
size.
lambasting Hollywood. We're lambasting Hollywood for their shitty adaptations of Alan Moore's stuff, and I'm thinking, well, we've seen some really great adaptations of comic books, though. Look at Marvel Studios. Marvel Studios has done a really great job of reworking a lot of their classic stories into modern popcorn movies that, for the most part, people have enjoyed to the tune of billions of dollars. And then I thought, oh God, what if Marvel had adapted Alan Moore's stuff? How bad would that have been?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, From Hell. I mean, us four people right here on this podcast are probably I now know 3 people that have read From Hell. Okay, that's about the extent of it. If Marvel, you can't compare. There's no way you could compare what Marvel could do with this property, because if Marvel took care of this, there's no fan base behind this, I think, that would turn into billions of dollars or millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, or however you want to say it. But I just don't think it's a property that could be marketed but to a select few, the ones that enjoy horror and the ones that enjoy a good serial killer flick. And that's not Marvel's bag. I just don't see that. I just don't see that as something that they would even touch. No way, no how. I
hear the words coming out of your mouth, but I'm still picturing Robert Downey Jr. Playing Johnny Depp's character.
Oh, come on. Well, I mean, I could see that.
With superpowers,
I do not believe that's the way they would have gone with it. I mean, look, Marvel, for all their faults and successes as a film studio, at least have a fundamental understanding of their properties and what makes them successful.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons that probably my favorite Thor story arc is never actually going to get adapted, because it's fundamentally a horror story and has entirely too much violence to draw in the average viewer. But I enjoy it.
Let me throw in a quick question, and we'll go wherever you want to, Mark. I know I'm hijacking a little bit here, but would any of you, Mark or Robert, what do you think? Is there a good director that you think would have actually turned From Hell into something decent to watch?
Yes.
Wes Craven.
Wes Craven.
Craven, when he was alive, could have done it.
Well, he would have had a hard time doing it when he was dead.
Well,
thanks for that follow-up, Mark.
It couldn't have been worse than what came out.
Can't see me, but I'm raising my hand right now.
Go ahead, Ben.
Ben?
David Fincher.
Yeah. Fincher.
Because he basically did, because he made Zodiac. Which is
between Zodiac and Seven.
Yeah, he made, that's a pretty good cross-section of, whatever, if you want to talk about a modern equivalent. But if you're talking about, a story about a bizarre and gruesome serial killer, and B, a bizarre and gruesome serial killer that never got caught, there you go.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and give my thoughts on the movie here real quick. I watched a great YouTube video. This guy tore this movie apart. I want to go ahead and give him props. If you guys get a chance, go out and check it out on YouTube. Guy's name's Deus Deacon, and that's spelled weird, so good luck figuring it out. But just type in From Hell reviews. I'm sure you'll figure it out. But anyway, one of my favorite parts that he brought to light was the part in this movie where the coroner gets sick because of what happened to these ladies. And one of the points that he made that rang so true is the fact that this guy goes every day and cuts bodies up, opens them up, and does autopsies. And then for this movie to make you believe that a coroner would get sick because of the injuries to this woman, and then we have our two inspectors, or our two policemen there, who have no problem with seeing what's going on and are feeling no ill effects. Just that right there exemplifies some of the worst parts of this movie. You got your love interest that really didn't need to be there, but it had to be because you wanted to make it, you wanted to make it palpable for our audiences to actually try and enjoy and get interested in these characters. Movie cliches all over, but that was the one point I brought from this movie. I was like, and rewatching it, when I watched it officially, I'd unfortunately watched the review prior to going in and watching the actual movie, but I just couldn't help but chuckle at how overtly ignorant that whole scene was. But who's next? Who wants to go next? And silence means nobody.
Nothing left to say about this movie.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing, okay. Because, after I say that, then I've got one last thing, of course. I kind of, having, reading a lot of the book and then seeing some of the movies side by side, I watched the first 15 minutes, earlier this morning. And I could tell within the first 15 minutes that that the movie missed the point entirely, because the book, in the way the story's told, in the way the artwork reflects the story, in the way the artwork reflects the setting and the characters, you understand what this time period and what this location and what the what the environment is all about. It's a very dirty, grimy, desperate sort of environment where there's a lot of impoverished people and a lot of crime and a lot of desperation. The first 15 minutes of From Hell, the movie, looks like they're basically trying to base Whitechapel on the set of an episode of Doctor Who. As much as I love Doctor Who, that's not a good idea. Like, the streets were really, those were some of the cleanest streets in the ghetto that you will ever see. Those are some of the youngest, prettiest Victorian era prostitutes you will ever see. Aberline in the book versus Aberline in the movie, there's about 25 years difference, which is always kind of hard to tell because Johnny Depp doesn't age.
And about 25 pounds as well.
Yeah. And just, you had, I said at first it reminded me most of Bram Stoker's Dracula, in that you get some talented people and you have all the resources to make something great, and you make something maybe half great. At the time, I think I was being too generous to this movie. Bram Stoker's Dracula was at least half a good movie. This is, Ian Holm might have been a better William Gull / Jack the Ripper if,
he wasn't a hobbit in real life.
Well, there's that, but we didn't know that at the time. And if they didn't spend so much time making him just the most cornball, like, slasher movie looking villain that they possibly could, he might have been good. Other than that, man, this was a waste of time.
All right, and I think let me let's go ahead and just Jesse, if you'll permit me, let's just wrap up the whole series here. And just so I'll leave the discussion. Actually, go to Jesse, and then we'll go around, and then we'll put a proper period on this whole thing. So, Alan Moore month. What do you think, Jess? Do you think this was a success? Was this fun? Was this a slog? Are you cursing me as soon as we hang up this podcast? What are your thoughts here?
Oh, man, I enjoy. Number one, I enjoy reading. If you throw a comic book in front of me or a graphic novel, whatever, and tell me, hey, read this, I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. The good part about it is I get to discuss it with my friends on this podcast and find out what everybody else thought. And the great thing about this is I get to hear from each and every one of you. Some of the things that you guys have brought up are things that I never thought of. And of course, this is a success. I think any time that, that some people get together and discuss a work of art, a work of literature, you're going to learn something. And one of the things that I learned from this whole month, we delve into Alan Moore, one of the most prolific writers of our time. And that's not joking. I mean, this guy has a mind to put pen to paper, and he will put something out there. There's no problem doing that. I've had a better understanding of what these four works have tried to get across. And I think, obviously, what you look at, and when you look for the common theme amongst these four pieces of literature that we've covered, is we get to see humans being human. That is, we already talked about that in episode 1, the deconstruction of a superhero. A superhero is not as super as you think. They're human. And the humanity that is explored in Watchmen, V for Vendetta, in From Hell, in, I don't know, not at a lesser extent in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but it's there. It's there. It's overpowering the way that Alan Moore interprets it and displays it to us throughout those pages. Now, as for the fun part, comparing the work to the movie, you guys are the movie. You guys are the guys I go to listen to for the movie reviews. Damn you, Hollywood! I have more of an appreciation of why Alan Moore said no more. Take my name off of that. Take my name off of that. I don't want to be associated with that. And there have been some very true adaptations. I mean, we look at Watchmen, which I think is the most faithful to it, and there's definitely an argument for V for Vendetta also. And I think we looked at two of the best and two of the worst in this whole thing we did, because League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was absolute rubbish, and so was I think From Hell had its bright points when it comes to the movie itself. I don't think it. I definitely don't look at it with a critical eye as some of you guys do. But it had its bright points. But my wife said she didn't like it, so I doubt we'll be watching it again anytime soon. So there you go. I enjoyed this. I think I had a blast because Alan Moore is a great writer. As we've discovered on source material in the past, we have looked at his writings in the past. As a matter of fact, a year ago yesterday, I think it was, we talked about the Superman story. Help me out here, Benjamin. What did I post? It was
I think it was Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Exactly 1 year ago to yesterday. So anyway, I had a blast. So I'll go ahead and I'll pitch it to Ronnie. You've been on here for all four casts, I think. I mean, what do you pull away from this?
Leave Alan Moore alone.
Leave him be.
You don't try with this stuff. Just leave it alone. Man can write a book, dude. He as much as we joke around, as much as I joke around and call him weird and crazy Alan Moore, he is so talented. Hollywood has failed him miserably when it comes to writing his or adapting his works to the screen. Not so miserably in Watchmen because it was pretty true to his original work, but League of Extraordinary Gentlemen every copy should be burned of the movie. Other than that, I mean, I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed rereading Watchmen, and I didn't reread From Hell. I'm not gonna lie to you guys.
I wouldn't blame you.
It was I'm not. I wasn't gonna do myself like that again. I mean, more power to you guys if you did it. Shoot, I mean, my hat's off to you, but I wasn't gonna do that again.
I hear you.
But it's been a lot of fun, and just being on here and talking to you guys.
All right, cool. Robert Winfree?
Why are you laughing at me for?
Sorry, I'm kind of multitasking. This was I had a lot of fun with this. Moore's a very interesting writer. He clearly has a lot to say, but he clearly has a lot of thought that goes into it as well. He has a very this might just be good luck on his part, but more likely discernment. He tends to find the right artist to work with for the job. And that's something I hadn't really considered before we got into this one, and I started kind of delving more into his work, around different titles in his work. I'd read a few of his things, but hadn't really thought about it critically a whole lot. And I agree that Moore's stories are very difficult to adapt, and unless you're really, really good at it, you should probably just leave well enough alone.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. All right, well, Benjamin, you got some closing thoughts on Alan Moore month, man?
Yeah, Alan Moore as a writer is one of my heroes, one of the biggest influences. Now that you guys have actually read, have read some of his work, I'm pretty sure I could show you. I write and I draw comics myself. I'm sure I could show you anything that I've written or drawn in the past, 15 years, and you probably be able to spot the Alan Moore influence pretty easily. That's how big of an influence he is on me as a creator and what I do. So, I don't get to talk too much about this sort of thing with people. So this, it was a good opportunity for me. First of all, to finally finish From Hell, which I, as dense as it is, I enjoy the hell out of that book. It's very good. It's also terrifying as shit in some parts. It's one of those things like Requiem for a Dream, where I understand how incredible it is, but I really don't think I could watch or read it more than once at a time over a period of several years.
Mm-hmm.
It just hits you that hard. I wanted to answer one of the questions that you hadn't posed earlier that I did actually want to answer.
Yeah.
Was you had mentioned a quote that said that called From Hell the Citizen Kane of comics.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, and my thoughts about that is, I've heard it said before. I've heard people that are not necessarily as into superhero books but still enjoy comics as an art form will call From Hell Moore's best work and possibly the best work ever produced in the comic book medium. And they'll usually call it that over Watchmen, which most superhero fans would call the greatest comic ever made.
Yeah.
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Citizen Kane as a singular work of art is as well regarded as it is due in large part to, its trailblazing and its contribution to its own genre in terms of, different stylistic and narrative techniques it innovated, its scope, challenging conventions, and just how much different it was from a lot of what came before it. And under those criteria, you could probably make a better case for Watchmen being the Alan Moore work that's closer to like the comics equivalent of Citizen Kane. Regardless of your personal opinions as to its quality, From Hell is up there, just in terms of how damn ambitious it was, which was basically, weaving a fictional story into a very, very factual story, in and out and back and forth, and it kind of hangs together pretty seamlessly, and a lot of things match up that you wouldn't expect it to. A lot of things are fictionalized in the book, but a lot of things that you wouldn't expect to be fictionalized, or a lot of things that you would expect to be fictionalized aren't. Which I guess proves sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Is I guess how I'll close that all with.
Yeah, I would love to get back into the bibliography. Maybe the library will be kind enough to lend me the copy again. They'll just look at me and say, you can't have it for 2 months this time. I'll be okay. But yeah, I'd love to get back in that bibliography that you were talking about in the end of it, just to see, what was true and what wasn't. So very cool. Very cool. All right. I think that's it, Mark. What do you think, man?
I think it's time to bid fond farewell. Thank you once again, gentlemen, for making this happen. We could not have done it without you. I am hard at work right now trying to think of another project to do in the near future. Our calendar's pretty packed for the year, but there's always next year, and I'd like to do something like this again. No idea what or how we're going to do it, but I like the idea of comparing comics to movies. I just don't know quite where to draw the next bit of content from. So
Frank Miller month.
There it is.
Frank Miller. Okay.
Frank Miller month. There's material there.
RoboCop.
So that being said, Jesse, again, thank you for helming this thing, and take us out.
All right. Well, we're going into plugs now, I guess. Hey, source material. I'll do a great podcast on here. It is every Monday, and we talk about comics, storylines, comic book story arcs. Check it out there. We're in the midst of He-Man Mini Comic Spectacular, so check it out. We just ended that there this past Monday. I talked about some of the great mini comics that came with He-Man, the He-Man figures, and make sure to give that Radulich and Broadcasting Facebook page a like. Stay up on top of all the great podcasts out there that we have to offer. And you can follow me at Stiznarkey on Twitter. And I think that I'm just going to cut it right short there for me and my plugs there. Ronnie, you want to go next, man?
Absolutely. You can find me on a podcast called Screaming Boy Podcast. It's more of a nerd culture kind of podcast where we talk about movies, TV, music, comic books, tech, anything that really interests us at that time. Here tomorrow, we're going to be releasing our Indiana Jones, Screaming Boy, and the Raiders of the Lost Podcast of Doom episode, and I didn't name it. It was a lot of fun. It was me. It was myself. It was Jesse and Adam, my co-host. We talked about all things Indiana Jones while we enjoy the character, and we've got a ton of other stuff on there. Pokemon Go, CM Punk and his disastrous debut on the UFC, the hand grenade, the phone turned hand grenade, Samsung Note 7. So check us out. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, and Screaming Boy PR on Twitter, Screaming Boy Podcast on Instagram, and www.screamingboy.com.
All right, awesome. Robert Winfree, sir.
This Sunday, as with every Sunday, you can find me hosting the 411 Ground and Pound radio show. It's a look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. It goes live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. This week, we will be reviewing UFC Fight Night 96 and previewing UFC 204. Because believe it or not, Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping are going to fight for the UFC middleweight title. And I want to slit my wrists. Also, you can find me most Tuesdays reviewing movies with Mark Radulich on Damn You Hollywood. Last week, a couple of days ago, we reviewed the Magnificent Seven remake. It's a movie. This coming Tuesday, we'll be reviewing Mark Wahlberg's latest set piece, Deepwater Horizon. So you can tune in for that. This Saturday, I will be providing live coverage for UFC Fight Night 96 in the MMA zone of 411mania.com. So stop by, say hello. I appreciate it. And I think that's all I've got.
My man Benjamin J. Cologne, sir, plug away.
Yeah, I got plenty of plugs. As always, as ever, I write, draw, self-publish a comic book called Soul Exodus. You can find it online on my website, soulexo.com, on Facebook, facebook.com/soulexo, on Twitter at soulexocomic. I do Sketchbook Saturday. I do at least one sketch in my sketchbook every single Saturday, and I post it on Twitter and Facebook for all to see. I will continue to do that. I will have one coming up this week. You can also purchase Soul Exodus digitally under drivethroughcomics.com if you are interested in digital copies of Volume 1 through 3 and my full-color one-shot of Soul Exodus called Wandering Star. You can find it at drivethroughcomics.com under Epic Team Productions or Soul Exodus. Check it out if you're interested in digital downloads. I will be exhibiting at New York Comic Con next week. Next week I will be well into New York Comic Con. I will probably be exhausted. My table is 1269 in the small press area of the Jacob Javits Center in New York City, October 6th through 9th. I plan on doing a lot of drawing. I will be releasing my price list for commission work at the convention, possibly tomorrow, as early as tomorrow. I'm trying to make it affordable for everybody. I'm also trying to stay as busy as possible. Drawing is what I do. Drawing is what I love. Drawing is what I love to share with the world. I make friends through art, and hopefully I'll be able to make some money through art. But check out my Twitter page and the Soul Exo Facebook page for price lists for convention sketches and convention commissions. I'm going to put Robert Winfree on the spot just a little bit here because Jesse mentioned earlier a little thing called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy that Robert has been known to host at times. A little under a year ago, and this was immediately after Halloween, so I had to wait a year to I suggested this at the time, and I had to wait a year for it. I suggested because Robert Winfree is also, like me, a gigantic Simpsons nerd. I suggested doing an episode of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy about Simpsons Halloween special villains. Do you recall that, Robert?
I do. I also recall that, there's no contest for number one. It's the Devil Flanders.
Of course, but, we can still make a conversation.
I remember that, and I'm still in many ways uncertain about the future of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy for a variety of reasons. But
fair enough.
If nothing else, you will certainly get a one-shot this October where we can talk about the greatness that are certain episodes of The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror.
Fair enough. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot. Hope you're not upset with me.
Nah, not at all. I appreciate the reminder, actually.
Cool. Last thing, and one of the best things, Radulich and Broadcasting Network, thank you all for having me and allowing me to ramble about comics and sometimes movies and allowing me to draw things that I enjoy very much. I do title card artwork for a little podcast you may have heard of called Long Road to Ruin. I will not only be doing artwork for, and this I had to be reminded of this last week and I'm kind of embarrassed about it, but I will not only be doing artwork for the upcoming Silence of the Lambs episode. Hopefully, this is still penciled in. I'm hopefully still going to be a guest on that episode because that is something else that I am also a huge fan of. And anytime I get a chance to talk about any Hannibal Lecter movie, well, I shouldn't say any Hannibal Lecter movie because Robert said that we're going to be talking about Hannibal Rising.
Yeah, sorry about that. Mark asked if it should be considered part of the Lecter canon, and since it's based on a book that was written by the same guy and made into a movie, I said yes. And then he said, okay, because we're going to do a Long Road to Ruin, and I wanted to know if this should be a one episode where we just do one show talking about 3 movies, or if we're going to do 2 shows talking about 2 movies each. And I knew I should have asked why. He wanted to know that first.
Well,
oh my God, such an evil laugh.
We'll try to keep it entertaining, but I'll be on that, and then I'll be doing artwork for the impending Harry Potter series, which I'm gonna start coming up with ideas for that very soon. Whole lot of drawing, but like I said, that's one of the things I love to do the most. So it's always a good time when I get to have a pen in my hand and a paper underneath it. So thanks again.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Alan Moore Month, one of my favorite epic podcasts that I've had the opportunity to do here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. We're going to send you out now. I want to thank the patriarch, Mark Radulich. I want to thank Screaming Boys, Ronnie Adams, the 411 Ground and Pound, Robert Winfree, and I also want to thank Benjamin J. Cologne. You guys have made this a lot of fun. I'm ready to get out of here. No more Alan Moore. We got to at least cut it off for maybe about a month or so, and then maybe we could ease ourselves back into it. That's it. I want to steal, I guess, try and steal what these, what Mark always signs out with, and that is, be well, be safe, behave.
Look at all these alternative comic book creators. Alan Moore, Art Spiegelman, Dan Clowes. I really identified with the girls in Ghost World. They made me feel like I wasn't so alone.
Yeah, whatever. Do you know anyone who works at Batman? Because I really want to draw Batman. I'm awesome at utility belts. Check these out. This is where the Batman keeps his money in case he has to take the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Moore, you wrote my favorite issues of Radioactive Man.
Oh, really? So you like that I made your favourite superhero a heroin-addicted jazz critic who's not radioactive?
I don't read the words. I just like when he punches people. How do you make his costume stick so close to his muscles?
Mr. Moore, will you sign my DVD of Watchmen Babies? Which of the babies is your favorite?
You see what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them. Suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
Hey, Teacup, why don't you chill out?
Very well. Oh, little Lulu, I love you, Lou, just the same. Ah.